The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Legislation is like.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Eye on Oshkosh. Cheryl, Hentz, and Dan Rylance here this evening, and we're very happy to welcome back to the show local attorney at law George Curtis. You probably recall or may recall that he was on a few weeks back and gave us a very insightful look and recap at what the recent judicial rulings were with regard to Act 10 and Act 32, in particular Act 10. But we had a lot of good remarks about that show, and so George was kind enough to offer to come back and talk to us about some other things that have changed under the Walker administration, things that affect you and I probably on more of a basis than we even realize, and I don't think that most people really know that some of these laws have changed. So George is here very graciously again, as I said, to help us understand what's changed and how. So welcome back to the show.
Oh, it's nice to be invited. I enjoyed it last time, and I hope some other people did. And I got some response, positive and negative, but that's the whole idea, is to increase the conversation and the understanding, and there's always another side.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we're going to hear about some of those other sides tonight. Let's start with the environment. Of course, we all heard about the mining bill, you know, from the other side of the state, and you know how that could possibly affect the environment if that were to be passed, which it didn't. But there are some other things that have passed that have impacted or will impact the environment. So why don't you tell us about those?
Absolutely, big time. One of the things that has taken place is a wetlands bill that basically means that with respect to a small wetland, that people don't even have to have a hearing, don't have to notify the public, that they're going to take care of erasing a wetland and building and constructing on that wetland. And if they file a petition and it's not acted on by the DNR within 30 days, and the DNR couldn't order breakfast in 30 days, it's automatically passed. And so what this means, that in addition to the fact that half of our wetlands in the state of Wisconsin are already gone forever, there has been another 80 acres of critical small wetlands that are erased without any warning. And now the people who passed this say, wait a minute, part of this law is that if you take an acre of wetland, you have to mitigate by replacing it with 1.2 acres of wetland. So it's a gain. But of course, that's really a farce, because these wetlands have been developed by Mother Nature over 10,000 to 1,000,000 years to really function as a cleanser, a sponge, an absorbent, to protect the water and the plants and everything like that. This mitigation is they don't even have to do it nearby. They can go anywhere in the state, find the cheapest bit of wasteland available, dig a ditch or a scour, hose some water in there, call it a wetland, and of course there is no proof that this has ever worked as a wetland. It's an absolute total trick on the citizens of the state of Wisconsin.
They want to get rid of the wetlands for agriculture purposes, construction purposes, all of that, and others?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
You know, wetlands are very inconvenient. And I'll admit, when I was a kid, I thought they were worthless. That's where we put the old manure spreader that didn't work. That's where we threw our junk. We didn't have a dump. That's where we threw the rocks. And we thought it was wasteland. And we learned the hard way that it really serves an important function. And if you want to get an education on wetlands, study the history of our marshes, like El Dorado Marsh and the Horicon Marsh, where they tried to drain them, ditch them, burn them, make them into lakes, and they fought Mother Nature every way they could think of for money, and they lost every time. Finally, Horicon Marsh, we give up. Mother Nature, you won. It's a wetland. But we spent millions and millions of dollars, including a 13-year fire that we couldn't put out.
Yeah.
This bill was passed by the legislature and signed by Walker?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Not a lot of opposition? Didn't know about it?
Well, frankly, there was no opposition really to any of Walker's legislation. What he's done in terms of the union bashing we discussed last time,
Right.
he pushed through bills on the civil justice system that are revolutionary, that set the civil justice system back more than 30 years with nobody talking about it. I was amazed. That's how I make my living, is representing injured people. And nobody was saying anything. And when I would talk to some of my clients and explain to them, you do know that your car insurance policy, it just became worth half as much as it was before this legislation. And nobody told you, and you didn't get a rebate. It just happened to you. They didn't believe me. They thought I was playing politics with them. But there was such a revolution in terms of the civil justice system that it is absolutely incredible. Right down the line, they took away stacking. In the past, if you have 3-4 cars in your home, like most people with 2 adults and a couple of children have, you have to buy 3 or 4 insurance policies. And in that you paid for 3 or 4 insurance policies, you had the right to stack them. For example, if you bought $10,000 worth of MedPay on each policy and you got 5 cars, you bought $50,000 worth of medical insurance. So you had $50,000 of medical insurance that you paid for. Well, under Walker law, tough. If you're in an accident, you have $10,000. The other $40,000 you paid for is a gift to your insurance company that might be paid back at election time. That's just one of the examples. Joint and several is a rule that the courts made that in an interest of fairness in a situation, you know, we're a comparative negligence state. And the injured person can't collect except from people who are equally or more negligent. The injured person's damages are reduced by their own percentage of fault. But what joint and several said, if there's a shortfall, if one of the guilty parties is uncollectible or not fully collectible, doesn't have enough insurance, doesn't have assets or something like that, under joint and several, the victim of this negligent act doesn't take the shortfall. The other guilty party has to fill in the gap. Well, that's been taken away because the Walker party said, well, that's the deep pocket theory, and that's evil per se. So now the victim, who's already been victimized, already been injured, already been out of job and medical expenses, and whose family is victimized, they now take the shortfall in terms of fairness. Well, actually, it goes beyond that. It means the taxpayers are taking it, because if the family can't take it in the shorts and handle taking care of somebody who's an invalid, then they become a ward of the state. They reduced the coverages that are required. And that's incredible. They're back to 1982 levels. Now, do you know what's happened to the cost of medicine since 1982? It's tripled. So when you're out there on the road now, if the person is insured, they're only required to have $25,000, $25.50, $25 per person, $50,000 total of insurance. that won't cover you if they cause your injury 1 weekend in ICU. So you better have increased your insurance to compensate for that. It means you better double or triple your uninsured motorist coverage or your uninsured motorist coverage. But that's not going to do you much good. One of the other gifts to the insurance industry that the Walker people did, and I blame the senators and the representatives just as much as Walker, they went along with this lockstep, and they knew better. They clearly knew better. It's called a reducing clause. Let's say you bought $500,000, and you should have at least $500,000 of underinsured motorists, for example. Well, you'd think if you bought $500,000 and your insurance company took a premium for $500,000, you ought to have $500,000. Well, not under Walker law. Your insurance company gets a reducing clause for any other insurance that anybody else involved in this accident who might be negligent.
And they deduct that from your half.
That's right. Yeah. That reduces what you paid for. Well, let me hear your question. I don't want to give a speech.
Well, let's go back because I want to touch on this joint and several thing. Does that just relate to car insurance, or are we talking, because, you know, people are jointly and severally held responsible in a lot of situations. Leases, for example, you know, what have you.
It refers to torts. So it isn't just limited to car crashes. It comes into effect with products liability. I mean, for example, you get a bad product. Maybe it should have a guard on. Maybe somebody's taking the guard off. Maybe the seller did something wrong. There might be multiple people that contribute to the negligence that resulted in this injury. Of course, it's most common in car crashes. It's very, very, very common in products liability cases. In medical cases, we have so many people. I can't read my own writing, so I certainly, if I was a pharmacist, couldn't read a doctor's writing. And somebody goes in for a specific medicine, and they misread the prescription. Now, the pharmacist may have some liability, the doctor may have some liability, and under some circumstances, the drug company ought to have some liability because there's so many of these drugs are being sold for purposes where they've never been approved by the government or by testing and things like that. So joint and several is a part of every tort type case, and a tort is a non-contractual action.
A farm accident.
Sure.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to stay on the car insurance thing for a moment here. You know, when Governor Doyle was still in office, I think this was probably back in 2009, 2010, the car insurance laws changed and people had to increase some of the coverages that they had. And I know I, for one, got a call from my insurance company saying, wanted to make you aware of this. You know, you guys are okay, but, you know, you can't ever drop below where you're at now. So did he basically undo what the Doyle administration had done?
And then some. You're right, and I think that in fairness to the people who don't see things the way I do, I should point out that in the Doyle administration, we had legislation called Truth in Auto. So you actually got what you paid for. And in the Walker administration, they just took that away and then some.
Okay, wetlands, insurance. Clearly this is special interest that's going to benefit humongously from these changes in the law. How much does the insurance industry make off of this?
Well, the insurance industry really has the license to steal. First of all, it's mandatory.
Yeah.
Secondly, if you've got the brains God gave a goose, you'll have about 10 times what's mandatory for your own protection.
Sure. Yeah.
Thirdly, because we're a conservative state, it's a bargain. You know, people talk about how expensive it is. It isn't.
Right.
Compared to anywhere else in the country, it is very, very cheap because we have conservative juries, and frankly, we've got companies that are efficiently run. That's one of the benefits of the work ethic that we have here in Wisconsin. Everybody should have a trusted insurance agent And that trusted insurance agent should be their best friend. That insurance agent can do as much for their family's life and security as their doctor or their lawyer. I'm very pleased that in this state we have, well, I'll tell you how profitable it is. You can't go 50 miles in any direction in this state without finding an insurance company. I mean, they've got insurance companies in Oshkosh, they got insurance companies in Berlin. We've got insurance companies everywhere because the payoffs in Wisconsin have always been low, and it makes perfect sense for farmers or co-ops to band together and make an insurance policy. There's nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with that. But we have to keep in mind, it's a contract. The first sheet in your insurance policy is the deck page. That's what you paid for. You buy it like a meal in a cafeteria. You get so much med pay, whatever you pay for. So much collision, so much liability, so much uninsured, and so much of this, that, and the other thing. Then read the next 27 pages. They take it away, paragraph at a time.
I don't read them, George.
But that's what you find out after you see everything they've taken away. But basically, it's competitive enough, you get what you pay for. And it's an absolute bargain. We get more coverage in the state of Wisconsin by 10 times than compared with Florida, which is another state I'm admitted to practice law in, which is a no-fault state. Those people get what the bear did in the buckwheat. They really get screwed. Okay. We have such a good system here that when Alaska became a state, they had 48 or 49 states to pick a tort system with, and they picked Wisconsin. It's good. It's very good, and I'm troubled that it gets messed with out of the premise that we're going to award our friends, which are the insurance companies that have kicked in millions of dollars to the politicians, and we're going to punish our enemies, which they want to punish the trial lawyers like me that represent individual people. That's okay. I probably wasn't going to heaven anyway. But what about my clients? They have a right to a fair shake, and they're not getting a fair shake the way things are treated. And just to show you how petty it got, the chiropractors backed Walker. The personal injury trial lawyers backed the other person. In this legislation, and I know it's one of the many things that's going to be determined to be unconstitutional, is if there is a shortage at the end of the settlement and the chiropractor doesn't feel he's fully paid, he can get his fees out of the lawyer fees. Now, no, that is just plain petty poke in the eye, I'll get you guys sort of thing.
It's kind of like Act 10. If you're for me, we exempt you from it, and if you're against me, we're going to...
Absolutely. And the Constitution requires some equal treatment of people who are equally situated. I mean, this chiropractic thing is a joke. I think the chiros were very foolish to want that, because it's just going to be the 8th and 9th, 10th thing that are found unconstitutional in all of this this legislation that was passed through. But of course, many people think that we have a litigation explosion, and
they don't like trial lawyers.
And frankly, we don't. We don't have, less than 5% of all the cases in court are tort cases. Most of the cases in court are family cases, and the next biggest group are collection cases of one business suing another. But just to show you how fair that is, in order to make it inexpensive, we have a small claims court. And if it's an individual suing a small claims court, you can sue with the smaller filing fee up to $6,000. That's a good deal. But if you're a corporation, your limit is $10,000. Some people are more special than others. Some are more equal than others.
So it's 6,000 in small claims.
Yeah.
I always, it used to be 5, wasn't it?
It changed. It has been going up. Yeah, yeah, and I believe it's 6.
And no appeals on
Oh, sure.
That's
That's one of the silly things about small claims court. I don't happen to believe in it, because whoever isn't happy with the small claims resort pays $20, and now they're in circuit court, which they could have gone in the first place, and then they've got a little more chance for a real full hearing. I admire what these court commissioners do. In an hour, They have to figure out what's the law, what's the facts. Usually there's not a lawyer to help them. There isn't a clear legal theory in the pleadings. They do an amazing job. Judge Bissett was a court commissioner for a while, and when he got elevated to the circuit bench, he was the most prepared judge I've ever seen, because he'd been doing this in an hour that now he's got 3 days to do. It's amazing.
Yeah. I want to talk about one thing that it was put forth and, eventually passed and signed into law by our, she's not ours, but Republican Assemblywoman Michelle Litchens, who everybody, I think, in this area has heard of. Earlier this year, we saw signed into law, and she co-sponsored this, the elimination of compensatory and punitive damages in employment discrimination cases. So, like so much of what we've seen lately, this benefits businesses and screws over the people who are injured, discriminated against, harmed in some way.
Absolutely. It is totally astounding. It's taking away the rights that employees have, and in this state they didn't have any. We're an at-will state in terms of hiring and firing. We have been struggling for many years to bring minorities, women, up to the level where they're treated the same as men, and we haven't reached that yet. But you take away compensatory damages, which means the damages to make you whole, put back what was taken away from you, and then you take away punitive damages, which is to teach them a lesson they can't treat you like this. Those are the only two kinds of damage they are. So basically, our state courts are now armless, handless. They cannot do anything for somebody who is subject to this kind of discrimination. It's absolutely incredible.
Go ahead.
Back to wetlands. Who benefits from this really weak change in the wetlands thing? I mean, who?
Businesses that want to construct anywhere.
Okay.
If you've got some land in Wisconsin, in many areas, certainly here in the valley, where at one time we were a lake bottom and we have the rivers confluing and the Lake Winnebago and Lake Poygan and that sort of thing, we've got a lot of wetlands. And so that it's very inconvenient if you've got 80 acres and you can only build on 15 acres. No question about it. And to buy land that you could build on, and there may not be any right next to your present operation, is going to be very, very expensive. I mean, we're talking about maybe millions of dollars for a building site. Now, if you can just drain and fill that wetland nearby, it can certainly help millions and millions of dollars. And this particular group that we have in power now, frankly, they're the corporate party. Everything for corporation. Individuals have taken it in the shorts. Consumers have taken it in the shorts. The protections and products liability, wetlands, the environment generally, the schools with their plan to go on the voucher system that it's going to just weaken further our public education and give money to people so they can chase their kids to private schools. This is all favoring money, corporations, big business, and all very, very much an attack on working people, people who don't have those options. I just read that 2 weeks ago, the Walker administration signed a decree that now all of the illegal docks that have been put in without permits are now legal. Well, okay. How many poor people you know been building docks lately? How many of them have cottages? Now, there's a good reason to have rules about docks because it interferes with navigation and with the enjoyment of the water, which under many Supreme Court decisions belongs to all of us. And these people who think they have the right to just build a dock out there and impede your progress and your enjoyment of the lake, they didn't. The DNR was supposed to enforce that. And the DNR admittedly was understaffed, still is, out of money. They had to close down 4 hatcheries last year because they didn't have enough money to put fish in them. Many of them don't have gas for their trucks. We've got 1 warden for every 12,500 fishermen. The DNR is crippled, and that's intentional. But now all these illegal docks are legal. I'll bet more than a few millionaires are going to have checks to write at the next election. Wouldn't you think so?
Just like they did with the most recent one.
That's right.
All right, let's make a case for Walker a little bit. Why did he win the governorship?
Well, first of all, I think he's a good candidate.
Okay.
I am not in agreement with those people who think just because he didn't finish college he's dumb. I don't think he's dumb at all. I think he's very, very smart, and I think he's very smart about dividing and conquering, and he was astute about that throughout the entire time. Secondly, it was the right time. We have this national reaction called the Tea Party. Angry people. They weren't all sure what they wanted, but they were sure they didn't want government and they didn't want taxes, and they wanted the rascals out. And he took real advantage of that. He had to be unusually astute to somehow take the middle-class working, privately employed, middle-class working people and make them hate the middle-class teachers. And so they should have been in this together because they're the ones who are getting screwed by the corporation and by the tax. That was, well, that's what he told the fake cock. But he's told he's told many people that. I divide and conquer. And that's what he's done with the chiropractors and the trial lawyers and that sort of thing. And I don't think the Democrats had a very, very attractive candidate. I think Barrett's a nice guy, but remember he had just had his arm shattered in that event at the fair. He had no energy, no real persona. And let's face it, this wave took place throughout the country of angry people who've decided we don't need any government. And he was the right guy at the right place. He took advantage of it. And the guy's no dummy. I don't agree with his goals and I don't agree with his methods, but I have to salute the man. He won twice.
Yeah.
And he balanced the budget, which the Democrats couldn't do.
Oh, that's true. I mean, you know, I don't want any of this to sound like the Democrats don't have their faults.
Right.
I mean, while I think that the Republicans locally, state, and nationally are the party of war, prisons, and corporate immunity, the Democrats have certainly been loosey-goosey with our money.
Yeah. I mean, for Doyle to use, what, almost $1.5 million of the stimulus money to balance his budget the last time.
Well, and that's because he failed to successfully steal from the Med-Mal fund, because there aren't any Med-Mal cases. You know, they talk about the explosion of Med-Mal cases. Which one is the explosion?
Yeah.
Well, but let's be clear. I mean, the budget has always been balanced. It's just a question of how it's being balanced. I mean, under our Constitution, it has to be balanced, and that's why these people who run around saying that this is the first time in years that we've had a balanced budget, that's why they're so full of crap, because we've always had a balanced budget. It's just how it gets balanced. I want to talk about something that could very well affect people who have a loved one in a nursing home or they themselves are in a nursing home. Under the new law, nursing homes and healthcare facilities may be able to actually hide reports about neglect and abuse of patients and residents, as well as statements made by employees to state investigators. Oh, that should scare all of us.
Well, it certainly scares me. As a matter of fact, they don't have to hide them. By law, they're prevented from making them available to us, and by law we can't use them, and worse than that, the district attorney can't use them in a criminal prosecution when they kill grandma. That has been totally taken away. Even reports that they are required to make under federal law are not admissible in evidence. And so basically, what protection do your loved ones have in a nursing home now? These things happen without your presence. They often happen at night when they're short on attendees. The only person who would know that they gave grandma the wrong medicine, or they dropped her, or something bad happened, is not even allowed, even though they're required under federal law to make a report, not even allowed to make that available to you or the district attorney's office. You basically have no remedy at all.
How does something like this even get to be legal, George? I mean,
well,
what rights? Then you have no case, really. You may have a case, but you don't have any ground to stand on for a wrongful death action or anything else.
You have no evidence. You absolutely have no evidence. And of course, that gets into an even deeper problem. You know, the federal Constitution, that's often brought up by the Constitution Party, that they believe in the Constitution. Nobody else believes in the Constitution. It says that the Constitution guarantees you a jury trial if there's $20 at stake. But we have pages and pages and pages in our statute book of caps where it makes no difference what the jury says because you're capped to almost nothing. I settled a case within the last week of a man who was hit by a gradol, which is a piece of road machinery that goes 70 miles an hour because it fits under a certain cap. The most he could get is $50,000. If he'd been killed, the most he could get is $50,000. If he's crippled for life, the most he could get is $50,000. A gradol goes 70 miles an hour, but it's within that class that is a $50,000 cap. There are other caps for $25,000. There are caps for pain and suffering. There are caps in nursing home cases. There are caps in medical mal cases. These people who believe in the Constitution that says we have a jury, well, what the hell can the jury do? Whatever the jury does, there's a cap, but that's just part of it. Why don't you go on to the next chapter, which is the immunities chapter? And you've got immunities for just about everybody that might be politically capable of contributing. You've got government immunities, you've got ski immunities, you've got Good Samaritan immunities, you've got equine. You know, the horses have a hell of a lobby. We got equine immunity. Some are more equal than others.
I'm getting depressed.
No,
And these are all things, we should again make the point, these are all things that have changed under Walker.
some of them were there before. They've just gotten a lot worse under Walker.
Yeah.
They've been expanded. The rights of the public, the rights of the consumer, the rights of citizens, the rights of working people, the rights of teachers, the rights of students, and the rights of people who give a damn about our environment for the next generation have all been squeezed. The enforcement of DNR has all been reduced, even though we have a stronger standard about phosphates going in the lakes than our neighboring states do. Walker said, I'm not going to enforce them because I don't want to give any advantage to businesses in other states. So they're simply not being enforced. We wonder why our lakes stink and have all of this algae and they really aren't healthful. We've got the tools and they won't even enforce them.
You mentioned consumer protection laws. You know, the Consumer Protection Office in Madison has really lost a lot of its strength. And that probably started under Doyle because there were budget cuts, staff cuts, what have you. But it too has gotten worse, I think, under Walker. They really don't do much of anything that I can see. But there's some recent legislation that has changed too with regard to consumer protections and what rights they have with product liability and so forth. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Well, frankly, I haven't seen that specific legislation, so I don't want to make a guess. I believe it's right along the lines of what you said about you can't get punitive damages and you can't get exemplary damages. The teeth has been taken out of enforcement of every consumer law that I have seen. Consumers really have a very much weakened position right now, and there isn't enough that we can do for them. You couple that with the job problem, and you couple that with the poor economy, and we have so many people coming into our office every day, and they've been in a little banger, and they really can't pay the bills, can't get treatment don't have wheels to get back to work. And the insurance industry says that they want to level the playing field. Wow, they own the playing field. They've written the rules. They've got their own refs.
Well, I know in the material that you sent us to kind of prep for this show, it talked about products manufactured overseas. Nowadays we see so many things being manufactured overseas, and I would think if there's a problem with said product, it would be already very difficult to bring some kind of litigation against the manufacturer. Now, under Walker, it's even more difficult.
Oh, it's become almost impossible. Most of this overseas stuff is sold through the big box stores like Walmart. And under the old law, anybody who was in the chain of distribution could be sued and was responsible for the defective product. Now you have to go after the manufacturer and prove you did. Well, the manufacturer is in Taiwan or Hong Kong and changes its name every Tuesday. The simple fact, you have no real redress for those products. And it's a consumer safety issue. A professor that we all know writes every once in a while for the Northwestern, and he says we ought to have tort reform to give our businesses an even playing field with the foreign businesses. Well, actually, any product that comes into this state has the same rules, no matter where it was manufactured. The rule that you talked about with Walker and the fact that we can't successfully go against the distributor anymore, and we've got to go to the manufacturer. Now that is a jobs bill. That should really help a lot of jobs in Taiwan.
Mark Harris, the county executive director, keeps telling us that one of the real major atrocities of the last session was the elimination of taxes from manufacturers and agriculture. And it's gonna take a huge amount of income away from this state for the next biennium and forever. And it kind of went under because everything is focused on Act 10. I think some of these things you mentioned.
A lot of them slipped through because of Act 10.
Because everything was on Act 10.
Everybody said, well, gee, if you're mad at Walker, you must be related to a teacher.
Yeah.
Well, everybody's related to a teacher, and I've had 10 kids that claimed they were students. But so we're all interested in education.
Yeah.
But okay, I'm not a tax expert,
okay,
and I don't want to pretend that I am.
I'm not either, but can you kind of walk us that this is going to be Legislative Fiscal Bureau reported that it would result in a shortfall of $128 million in tax income over the next biennium, and this is going to be phased in. I think it's fully implemented in 2016, but for a state that needs income, look at the big breaks that manufacturers and agriculture are going to get on this thing.
Well, clearly, it's an effort to give those breaks for a political payback.
Right.
No question about it. And of course, agriculture is always, I was raised on farms, always amusing to me that these farmers show a loss every year, even when they get up to 10 of the blue silos. And when and when Grandma dies, the farm is worth $5 million. They are smarter than I am, I'll tell you.
And I don't think a lot of them pay much taxes.
No,
either.
they don't.
And if there's a natural disaster, their hand is raised up right away.
Well,
right?
not only that, you're right. My dad was a farmer. He always voted straight Republican. He was a right winger, if you'd ever find one, and he was against communism, but he bought everything from the co-op, which is of course communism.
Yeah. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Oh, okay. I think, and you've kind of alluded to this, George, I think we can pretty much surmise why a lot of this stuff has gotten passed and why it's favoring certain industries, certain sector groups, special interest groups, what have you. Do you have any other professional opinion as to why it's happening? Or is it just paying back for political favors?
Well, I think it's a combination of payback. I think some of the fault belongs on the people, including myself, who have short memories. When we had the majority, we maybe should have listened, should have compromised, should have more even-handed honestly handled things. Even though I think it was good law, the Doyle Truth in Automobile was passed at the middle of the night, slipped in the budget bill. No, I don't think that's kosher. I mean, so some of it we deserve. Some of it, some smart people were planning to really take over and give this whole state to the corporations. And some of it is a national reaction to what's happened in our country. The Tea Party is the label we put on it, but it's not just the Tea Party. People are angry how their taxes are being used. They're angry about their view that the government isn't respecting their preferences. And a combination of the anger and the opportunity, it was right there. And maybe the three people at this table are partly at fault.
I share that. And I think the media, I didn't know most of these things. I mean, are there good legislative reporters in Madison that are you know, writing to their local papers, and we get a column? We don't get a column in Oshkosh on what's going on in the legislature, unless some crazy thing like you know, Gordon Hentz having a temper tantrum. Then of course we hear about that for a week.
Sure.
But I haven't heard about these things.
Well, I get the Madison paper,
Okay.
and I get more of it in the Madison paper, but then, of course, people in the outskirts kind of discount these people as pointy-headed liberals, and so no, we probably don't get a lot of it here.
And the defeat of Russ Feingold, to me, was, I mean, it was just an absolute shock that Ron Johnson could knock him off, and that's part of that bigger thing,
Sure
too,
it is.
isn't
Ron was at the right place at the right time.
Right.
He was more equipped than Sarah Palin,
Right.
but not a lot. I'm not saying he isn't doing a good job, because he maybe is. But the mood of the country was just perfect to knock somebody off. Everybody, even the Republicans, had Russ Feingold as one of the top half dozen senators, but there's precedent for that. Didn't we have a guy named La Follette and replace him with a guy named McCarthy? I mean, we're good at that here.
And Proxmire?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that the politicians, no matter how good they are, don't own it. The citizens own it, and the citizens have a right to be wrong. And who are we to say we're wrong? Maybe Ron Johnson will turn out to be great. We've got to give him a chance. He's my senator now. I voted for the other guy, but he's
me too. Could we turn a little bit on some just local elections?
Sure.
You know, one of the big, I think, issues in the fall is which party is going to control the state Senate. And we've interviewed both Jess King, who's the current senator from the 18th district, and we've interviewed her opponent, Ron Gudix from Fond du Lac. Rick, I'm sorry. What's your sense of that race?
Well, I think that it's going to be a tough race for Jess King, just because of the conservative makeup of any district that has Fond du Lac and Fond du Lac County in it. I think that while I think she's done a good job, I think she's probably the underdog. That's my guess. And as with regard to the first remark you made, I think we're missing the point when we blame all of this on Walker, because he couldn't have done any of this unless he had a lot of Republican legislators who knew better going along with him.
Or didn't know better.
And with no guts.
Yep.
Absolutely. Some of these people are friends of mine. They're still friends of mine, but I am so disappointed because they knew better. On all of these issues, on education, on the union busting, on the tort system, and on that terrible bit of mining legislation that was written by an out-of-state mining company, their lawyers, and they were going to scream that through without any real public input or preparation or investigation. I cannot believe that all the Republican legislators, except this one guy with guts, Schultz, I think his name is.
Yeah, he voted with the Democrats.
He just said, "I'm for jobs. I'm not against mining, but you can't do this to a third of the state of Wisconsin without some protection and study." I'm so disappointed in the legislators letting themselves be intimidated into going through with this rape of most of our important rights in the state of Wisconsin. I just can't believe that happened.
54th Assembly, a race between incumbent Gordon Hentz and challenger Paul Essler. Any thoughts on that race?
Well, that's not where I am. You know,
Okay.
I live out in the west in the sticks,
53, okay.
and I know both these guys. I think they're great guys. I gather that Paul is trying to ride the extreme conservative, but I'm also an independent. I've managed to offend everybody in my political career approach, and maybe that will sell. I mean, that is Paul. I mean, he's a shoot from the hip guy, and
Yep.
read about it later. And Gordy's, while more studied and scholarly, he managed to pick up a couple of barnacles in his trips to Madison. I think that's a fair fight. And I think that's a more balanced district. I think whoever works the hardest has a chance to win that.
That's a good assessment.
It's interesting, though. You know, I took a look at Paul Esslinger's website, and you know, he's talking about all this debt that today's children are going to be saddled with, and he made reference to you know, all the debt that the city has. For example, $133 million worth of debt. Well, he sat on our city council for 10 or 11 years. You know, he passed a lot of things with his other colleagues on the council that helped to incur a lot of that debt. So now that he's not on the council anymore, there he is complaining about all this debt that the city has. And then he's, you know, he's sitting there just constantly harping about, I haven't seen it, but Dan mentioned it to me, other people have told me on his show, harping about Gordon Hentz. Well, you know, I guess Paul has forgotten that he too was rolling around on the floor apparently in a bar getting into, you know, some kind of a disagreement with someone who, I don't know, skipped a song on a jukebox or whatever. I don't know if he was actually rolling around on the floor, but I think that's what the newspaper said, is that he was in a scuffle. So, you know, just little things like that that I don't know if he's thinking that the public has forgotten or what. So his closet isn't entirely free of skeletons either. The fire engine thing too, lest we forget about that.
Yeah.
So
Where is the fire engine?
I don't know. Ask Paul. He must know.
Well, Paul has certainly never ducked controversy. And when you're a politician, you get a free genealogy, and you don't get to write it. Your critics get to write it, and that's just part of the territory of being a politician. I would hope that people would really look at it and say, who better reflects the important views of the constituency than a popularity contest?
Democracy has to nourish itself on voters who know the facts and the things. And what you've gone through is a litany of things where knowledge was not a basis of these things passing. What's our future if this is going to continue?
The public was totally unaware of what the Walker executive branch and the legislature that was Republican, he had the votes,
Right.
passed through. And while I have had many reports of the threats he made against people like Mike Ellis, who normally are pretty independent and intelligent, in order to keep things under control, including doing advertising, write to Mike Ellis about this and call Mike Ellis about that. I am amazed that these normal watchdogs just went to sleep and let the whole thing go past them, whether it was intimidation or finally having control or what it was. But Wisconsin has a right to be deeply disappointed that there's this much destruction done to our infrastructure just in a 2-year period. It's just incredible.
That's why that control of the state senate is really important for the next plan.
That is the most critical thing.
Yeah.
We know what we've got in a governor,
Right.
and we know that he wants to prove points and he doesn't care who he offends. We know that he plays rough, and we know his priorities are not with schools, not with our educational system, not with our environment, not with our civil justice system. His priorities are to make corporations immune and rich. So, and he's not bashful about it. He doesn't lie about it. He admits that. So if you like those priorities, vote for legislators that are going to vote with him. And if you don't, you better vote for the other people who are going to challenge him.
That seems to be Mitt Romney's sort of mindset also. You know, we're taping this the day after the first presidential debate. Did you watch the debate last night? Were you able to see
not.
it? Okay.
I took a shower. I thought it was more appropriate. But
I think that was a very wise decision.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, have you seen any replays of any portion of it?
I have, and no, I think that while I voted for many Republicans over the years, and I've supported many Republicans. I ran for DA as a Republican. I was a part of Tommy Thompson's 500 Club, and I admired his sense of responsibility, balance, and his ability to compromise. I'm not going to vote for Romney, and I'm not going to vote for Walker. I'm not going to vote for any of these people who believes that wealth and immunity from taxes and responsibility should be our religion right now. I'm not going to do it, but I only have one vote, and you know, one of my employees who feels very strongly the other way is going to wipe out my vote.
Sure.
She's going to have to vote to do it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the key. Got to get people out there to vote, or get them to vote absentee, or whatever it takes.
You wanted to move into the court decision about guns in the courtroom.
Yeah, you know, Christian Gossett, of course, as I'm sure you know, was trying to get his staff, his attorneys on staff, to be able to carry a concealed weapon in the courtrooms, and the judges said, no, you're not going to do that, and he challenged them, you know, judicially, and the decision has recently come down that they can basically do what they want. You know, what are your thoughts on what he was trying to accomplish, and how do you feel about his position that if the judges can do whatever they want and can ignore state law with regard to this issue, that they can then do whatever they want and kind of run roughshod over other rights that our state law provides for?
I don't know Christian well enough because I haven't been doing criminal work the last 15 years. He strikes me not only as a very conservative guy, his background is in police work and I think in religion, as a matter of fact. And I think that he reads things literally from my few contacts with him, and I think he has political ambitions, and I think this was a wonderful play to the red of neck and blue of collar that believe that the Constitution says what it maybe doesn't say about guns, and I think there was a political reason to it. I don't think anybody with any experience in the courts and the dangerous people that are in the courts believes that we're safer with more people with guns in the courts. I mean, as a practical matter, and I was a prosecutor for a while, and I did a lot of criminal defense work. I wonder if there should be any guns in the courtroom, and I own guns. I mean, I'm not anti-gun in any event, but I really was speculating myself as to what is the point of this, because if people plan a break, they have other people in the courtroom. The public is invited to the courtrooms, and those people in the public who are planning a break or something dangerous will know ahead of time what people in this courtroom have weapons. And the more people in the courtroom with weapons, the more opportunity there is for a tragedy to happen, in my opinion.
How would they know if someone's got a weapon, because it is concealed?
Well, that's a very good point. I don't think that most concealed weapons are that well concealed, and usually we kind of know the makeup of the other people in the courtroom. If it's a case involving somebody who is allegedly dangerous, they have extra cops, and those people have weapons that aren't concealed, so that it's a very interesting question, and my best answer is I don't know, but I was trying to figure out what is Mr. Gossett trying to accomplish here.
Yeah. What about to the bigger issue, though, George? Because he was on the show, and he talked very, I think, articulately about the fact that if the judges get to say whatever make whatever rules they want in their courtroom, and in this instance, they are basically disagreeing with and not upholding state law, which says that these DAs can have concealed weapons in there, then they don't have to go along with any state law. And that was the premise that he was was making. Yeah.
Well, I didn't realize that was his premise, but I do think that the judges really are in charge of their courtroom and can set any kind of a reasonable rule in the courtroom. And if you don't like it, then you do what Christian did and what one of his assistants did, and you appeal it. And then if you don't like what the intermediate appellate court does, you see if the Supreme Court will touch it. The intermediate court is kind of a cleaning agency anyway. I mean, they really don't decide anything. They correct error and pass the buck.
He went to the state Supreme Court initially, and they said no.
Sure.
So then he went back and filed with the appeals, and they're the ones that now have written. And he could appeal it back, but that's not going anywhere.
Well, maybe it will. Remember, our Supreme Court is pretty dysfunctional.
Right.
So how do we predict what the Supreme Court's going to do?
Well, that's true. That's true.
What if a judge makes a decision about a rule in their courtroom that isn't reasonable? Then we still have only the same avenues of recourse, and we're all not necessarily savvy enough to be able to file some kind of legal document against them and start pursuing it the way Christian did. I mean, what are the layperson's options?
Well, frankly, it's been my experience of doing this for 51 years. It takes the same amount of training to handle a seemingly simple court case as it does to do a kidney transplant. Yet I am amazed how many people think, because they know they're right and they can read, that they're going to come out all right in court, and they really don't. So to answer your question specifically, if it's a citizen, and there are unreasonable decisions made by judges every day, you have to go to the appellate court within the appeal time. The appellate court doesn't do a hell of a lot, and then you try for the Supreme Court, which may look into it seriously. But you better be a lawyer or have a lawyer. This isn't anything that just comes with common sense, because the law isn't always common sense. It often isn't. It's, as we've learned in the last 2 years, it's a result of power, politics, influence, and special interests.
Okay, very good. George, thank you so much. This hour has flown by, but again, very, very enjoyable. And
I feel like I'm a student.
Yes.
Shared a lot
but
of
he said he's not a teacher.
Well,
you enjoy the trip you're taking. I envy you.
Okay.
That should be wonderful. Maybe you can do a show about that when you get back.
Oh, she'll probably ask me a few questions.
All right.
But anyway,
right.
thanks a lot.
Right.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
We appreciate
And that's going to do it for us. We will see you next time. Until then, take care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.